I know it's really dangerous to set expectations for yourself super high because it's so rare that things live up to the hype you have built up in your head. But when it comes to Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, I can't help it. A lot of my Booktube friends have frequently been telling me that I am going to love Warbreaker, that it might be a favorite of the year or possibly of all time because they enjoyed it so much. It seems to be a lot of people's favorite Brandon Sanderson book, and so that's really something that has me building up the expectations in my head. So let's jump into this reading vlog and see if Warbreaker can live up to the reputation. I've made it to chapter 21, or page 215 in Warbreaker. So now that I'm about a third of the way into the book, I thought it was a great time to talk to you a little bit about the plot and my initial thoughts, because there's not too much I can spoil at this point. Before I dive into it though, if you are a fan of Brandon Sanderson and reading vlogs, I'm going to link a playlist down below that has all my Brandon Sanderson videos, because I am really becoming a fast fan of Mr. Sanderson. Primarily, we are following two princess sisters. We have Ciri, who is 17 years old, and her older sister, Vivenna, who is 22. Now, their father, the king, has promised one of them to marry the god king of like a competing kingdom, and it's run by gods, and they have to do this as per a treaty. So one of the daughters goes off to marry this god king, who is known to be very vengeful, with a quick temper, very violent. So Our girl is very nervous, but she is going along with it. So she goes to this new kingdom and it's very different there, very different from what she's used to. So she's trying to acclimate. We are introduced to a very complex magic system, but the way in which Sanderson writes it makes it totally understandable. I am following along very, very well. So in this world, it almost seems very muted and dull in terms of colors. It makes me think of The Giver, which is a dystopian YA novel where everything's in black and white. And it's kind of like that. And our two sisters have the ability to change the color of their hair. It's actually linked to their emotions. So like if they're shocked, it turns white and they have to like put in the effort to turn it back to brown. I think joy is like a blonde color. So that's really interesting. And they put a lot of work into keeping things even keel and level. So there's something about magic that's related to colors, but then there's also breath. This is the primary source of power, and it's almost like a currency. So someone can take breath from another. It essentially sucks the life out of them because they're very dull afterwards, kind of lifeless. But for those that collect the breaths, they become powerful, they get different abilities, they can animate inanimate objects, they can just have heightened senses. I'm still learning more about all what the breaths can do, but our two sisters come from the kingdom where that is very frowned upon, to take breath from others, which makes complete sense. You're taking the life from others. Even though it has to be given willingly, it's explained to us that you can bend that rule. You can make someone willing to give you their breath. So we're following those two sisters in this magical world, and then we also follow this god who is like the god of courage and bravery. His name is Lightsong, and he is hilarious. I'm really enjoying his character and the sarcasm there. He's very lazy. He doesn't want to participate in politics. He doesn't want to do anything. He often like tries to pretend he's sick to get out of things. And his priest is like, you're a god. You can't be sick. You can't be hungover. You can't have a headache. Get to work. And so he's kind of funny, and he's also kind of struggling with the fact that he doesn't remember his life prior to this godship that he's been in for the past 5 years. It seems like how it works is his job is to listen to petitioners of the kingdom, and his job is to find someone to like give his life to, sacrifice his life. And so he gives hope to the people that if they behave well enough, if they're good enough, if they run into a problem, that he will sacrifice himself for them. And he's like, these guys are idiots. I'm not giving up my life for anybody. I'm kind of sensing that will change. But it's kind of weighing on him a little bit, even though he's so sarcastic, hearing about these children going through hardship and there's nothing he can do to help unless he sacrifices his life. So he's kind of thinking like, what happened prior to this? Who was I before this? And why do I have this vision of a woman in my head? There's someone that he just can't quite get out of his head, even though he doesn't know who she is. Lightsong actually just met the sister that came to this kingdom to be married, and he realizes that she's in a very dangerous position. And so he's kind of apprehensive about all the politics going on around the sister, but he doesn't know what to do. I'm hoping he gets involved, right? I mean, we're kind of setting it up that way. But the other sister that did not get married came to the kingdom to try to save her sister. And so she aligns with this band of mercenaries who are also hilarious and sarcastic, and I'm enjoying them as well.
Honey, you've got a big storm coming.
I can see the mercenaries and Lightsong, their sarcasm really irritating me if I read this at the wrong time. Good thing I'm in the mood for a little chuckle. So it has me very entertained, very charmed by the characters. So these mercenaries are very fun, and they agree to help this other sister in her efforts to free the other sister, right? For a fee. But I'm really enjoying them. I'm enjoying how this is getting set up. We have some villains that are introduced. I just finished at this really good plot twist around the God King and the gods and the priests and the whole political dynamic. So I just reached a little plot twist there that I'm really excited to learn more about. So the story's going to take a different direction than I was originally thinking. But I mean, I'm still really early on in it, so I just gotta keep going. But in short, the plot has me intrigued. Even though we have a lot of different points of view, I'm really compelled to keep reading about the plot. I like the different characters that are being introduced, even the really sarcastic ones. They're adding a lot to the story. The magic system is complex, but it's so well written that I'm following along very clearly, and the visualization that I have around this magic is really cool. So far it is living up to the hype and the reputation I had built up in my head, so I'm gonna keep going. I have some other things I wanna do to reset for November, so I'm gonna go ahead and get those done. A little bit of decorating, and then I really need to start off the month on the right foot with some of my studies. So I am going to do that today before I pick up Warbreaker. I have to be responsible. So I'm gonna go ahead and get going on all that. Well, I'm all finished with my November reset. I feel very much set up for success this month, and I finished Warbreaker. So let's go ahead and talk about this book now that I am done with it. I already told you what it's about, so that covers most of the plot. I don't want to get into it too much more because I don't want to spoil it, but I will say that it was very fast-paced. There were some twists that I did not see coming. Very, very engaging. And I love that I did not get confused with the multiple POVs. Everything came together quite perfectly, except for maybe one element of the ending. I feel like it wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't a cliffhanger, but it was like, we're just gonna assume this one piece works out okay. We're not gonna follow it. We're just, we're set up for success, but we're just gonna assume it all works out. And I thought that was a really interesting choice. Now, this is listed as number 1 in a series, and I think I read that Brandon Sanderson is going to do the sequel after Stormlight Archives 5. But you can really read this as a standalone because it does have a very satisfying conclusion. There's like another storyline, maybe even a macro plot that I can see carrying forward for a new series. But if you just wanted to read this as a standalone, I think that's perfectly acceptable because everything was concluded. It was very satisfying. I'm happy with how it ended up. During my check-in, when I was about a third of the way through, I talked about the magic system with like how breath works and how the colors are integrated. I mentioned how if someone gives their breath, they're like a drab. They lose a little piece of themselves. They're kind of like in a brain fog. But there's also like almost a zombie element as well with the lifeless. And so like there is a army built up of lifeless soldiers that don't need food or water or rest. They are lifeless. And so that was a cool element to the magic as well. The world was so expertly done. I mean, of course, it's Brandon Sanderson. He's great at that. But the magic was just so unique and interesting. I really appreciated it, and it was so compelling to read about. Also during my check-in, I mentioned the characters and how much I was enjoying them. And now that I have finished the book, I can still say that I love the characters. I love the character arcs of so many of these people. Lightsong the god and what happened with his journey, the two sisters and how they really evolved and changed. They really grew up a lot throughout the course of events, and I was just so thrilled with where both of them ended up. But how interesting is it that like my favorite character in Warbreaker was an inanimate object? The sword. I think it's called Nightblood. It was like my favorite character. So unique and fun. I love how this inanimate object can speak, well, maybe speak to certain people and has a personality, and yet because it's not of this world, it's not human, it doesn't understand a lot of the concepts, like evil, for example. It doesn't necessarily know what evil is, but it is very enthusiastic about fighting against evil. So there was so much, I don't know if I would say it's comedic relief, but so much lightheartedness coming from several of our characters that had me chuckling a little bit to myself during my read, and so that added a lot to my enjoyment. That sarcasm or lightheartedness added to the tone, and I was kind of interested to see what the tone of this book would be, since we're kind of dealing with an impending war, and what that could look like. Obviously, wars are hard, people die, right? So I didn't know if this would be like a super heavy book, but the humor kind of added a little bit of lightness to it. And what was interesting is, I think what I liked about this book, it wasn't so much, we're not focusing on like battle scenes or fighting scenes. I mean, they're definitely there, but we're focusing on before the war, like the impending war. Is it going to happen? Do we want it to happen? Do we want to take the defensive position, offensive position? Who's the real enemy here? And it was more around the politics. So I really enjoyed the politics of this book, and it wasn't like a comedy book. It wasn't lighthearted all throughout, but it wasn't like this heavy tone that often comes with war stories. And I think that's because we mostly focus on the politics and the impending nature of a war between these kingdoms. I knew pretty early on that Warbreaker was going to be a 5-star read, and now that I have finished it, that is definitely true. I was really engaged. I feel like I tore through these pages because I was so interested in what would happen next. I don't think there was any element that I disliked about the book other than acknowledging that this one element of the conclusion was rushed, or we weren't a part of it. The reader wasn't a part of it. We're just told to assume that it worked out okay. I'm very happy that I feel satisfied with the ending, because I knew that this was technically a book 1, but I had heard you could read it as a standalone, so I was kind of nervous if there would be some element of a cliffhanger, but I feel like it concluded very well. I feel very satisfied and complete, and this was a great way to kick off the month of November, so I'm so happy that I read that. Again, I will add this video to my Brandon Sanderson playlist, linked down below, so please check that out, because this journey with this author has been so mind-opening, like really opened my mind to more fantasy, because I always thought it would be heavy and bring me down a lot, and while there are some emotional moments in a lot of his books, I'm really enjoying his writing style. Most of the time I enjoy like his humor. His characters are phenomenal. His magic systems are just so unique. So I'm having a great time with Brandon Sanderson, and he's quickly becoming a favorite author. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in this November reset video and reading vlog of Warbreaker. Happy reading to you, and I will see you in the next video.